So here we will have a look into first shading. At a certain point when the groom is like close to be finished, or for this groom, for example, it would be good to see it with the correct shading, because white fur can be quite translucent, opacity can be quite see-through, so this will have a certain effect on our groom as well, so it would be good to check that in the lighting environments. And here we will just import a HDRI, and I will drop in an environment light for that. Yeah, the groom is by no means finished, but I think in order to progress it further, it will be good to test it with the correct shading, especially to judge how the clumping looks like. It'd be extremely helpful to have a lighting setup prepared, or like a shading setup. It doesn't have to be a lighting setup. Normally, a normal HDRI is enough for look depth turntables from a grooming stage, so you don't need like super well lit shots for that. The whiskers are currently just in a guide SOP. That means we will have to create a render geometry SOP in order to render them. And I will just drop a geometry SOP and drop an object merge into here as well and link it to our created. Same time, and you don't necessarily want that for a creature as dense as this one. And now we're starting our render view. That if you haven't created a mantra SOP, will automatically create a mantra SOP here. We'll just set the camera to our CAD cam that we created earlier, and then you will see it. It's building up the octrees and the geometries, and here there's just a normal shader applied to it, and we will force the whiskers because we don't see them in the render, and by forcing them you will see them. So yeah, that seems to pick up everything correctly. Is we're going to up the resolution in the camera settings. For groom, it can be quite helpful to have at least 2 to 4K renders. I think 2K will be enough, you can always zoom in. But you need to have a high resolution to see the hair and judge it. And now you can press the setting camera to viewport in order to look through your camera and move it. So yeah, we will render that once more to see how our camera looks like now. And we will also have a look into our hair shader. We'll just do a test in order to see if everything picks up it correctly and is changing it. And that looks fine. Often the root and tip color can help you in order to work out clumps more if you have like a very clumped look to your character. I often just start with a very raw shading and try to avoid using maps until I have the right value that I need for this character. For that. But yeah, it's important to match the shading as raw and as close as possible before you go into too much detail. For this character, it's not a very like heavy reliant look on textures, so we will work mostly on the shading. So we're having a look into the colors to a red tone in order to see what exactly happens in your So the transmission is the light that is traveling inside of the hair. For white hair, it will be quite a high value. It's like a polar bears. Basically, they have like very dark skin and almost translucent hair, and the light is being like reflected inside of the hair so many times in order to reach the skin. And we want to like imitate this effect for this character. Normally, they also have like a medulla, which is like an inner core of the hair, but yeah, here this shader doesn't support that, so we will just ignore that. So for white hair, it's also good to have opacity settings. So what I will do is I will mask out the tip of the hair, so the tip will gradually have less opacity, and I will also later overall go down on the opacity. So this will give you like a much softer look. So here, this is the secondary reflection. Doesn't seem to have much influence of or overall look. It really depends on your character. White hair can be drastically different from any other hair. It's a nightmare to render because you have all these opacities and translucentness that you normally wouldn't have unless it can be quite different if you have like a red character or a brown character. And what can be GR and see how your shader works in a different lighting setting. I will also try to go above 1, but here it doesn't seem to be quite successful because all the other values are getting turned down, which results into like a very dull look that I don't want to necessarily go for here. Will be turned on. So here I like to go a little bit more translucent on the overall hair. To take screenshots in between. You can also stack them up to the Quattro view, or you can, there's a snap. The option enable transparent shadows are very, very useful for this character here. Can help you a lot to make color settings of the root and tip color, and I made the tips slightly more yellowish. You can see that you're getting all this yellow translucentness in the render. I also made it more yellow. And the speck a little bit more gray blue tinted. And I like the ramp that we're creating here on the shadow corner. In production, sometimes when you render white fur, we did in other companies was that we rendered gray fur, and then we did a lot of comp effects, because the render times, if you would render it correctly, the render times would have been so high that you render like 20 hours a frame, and this is not very workable in production. So we did a lot of like post-processing and comp. So yeah, white fur is just like a little bit out of the whole equation. But yeah, I think Mantra is giving you like a very good solution. I tried rendering this same character in RenderMan and Arnold as well, and I think yeah, the Mantra solution was by far the one I like the most. If you want to switch between like multiple renders, you can always export it as geometry into Maya and then render it there in Arnold or RenderMan. There's even a RenderMan version for Houdini. So yeah, we can see that the whiskers here are not I now disabled the hair because I want to have a closer look into the skin and eye settings. First of all, I want to have a look into the cornea, so it will be very translucent, so we don't really need the diffuse settings. So we will go down on the opacity. What we will need is we will need For some reason, the specular is not showing up here yet, so I will test why that is the case. And it seems to be connected to the opacity. So if we put this to a higher value, the specular will show up. I like the refraction setting. I think it makes more sense when you have old cats because there's quite some buildup in the eyeball, and for some diets, if you have like sugar disease, for example, there is some buildup also in humans as well. You can fake that over the cornea and make characters look older in general. But yeah, for this one, I kind of like that effect, so I left it in a little bit. You don't want to go overboard, of course, because otherwise your character will look blind. Yeah, I'm trying out the emission settings. Sometimes when you have caustics, you can always affect that a little bit over emission. But here, it didn't look too good. Especially when you have a map or like a photo image of your character, you can always get the grayscale information from there, or like a high pass information. Use that as a emission map that usually gives a super nice effect and will top up your realism. But yeah, for this one, I will just try to go without maps as far as I can. I'm having a look into the subsurface scattering settings too.